You know what most people do when someone pulls away? They chase, they beg for an explanation, they want closure. And let's be real, closure is just a polite word for, give me a reason why you didn't choose me. But here's the thing, when you ask an avoidant for closure, you hand them all the power. You say, my peace of mind depends on you. And that's the exact opposite of attractive. The truth is, closure doesn't come from them, it comes from you. The best way to get closure isn't to sit across from them with teary eyes waiting for an answer, it's to reclaim your dignity and decide, I'm closing this chapter myself, because the moment you stop chasing and start living as though your value was never in question, that's the moment they feel it. That's the moment they think twice. Avoidants don't regret when you demand, they regret when you disappear and thrive. So the next time you're tempted to ask, why didn't you love me the way I deserved? Stop. Don't ask. Show them, by your actions, that you don't need their words to move forward. That's the kind of closure that turns heads and, yes, makes them regret losing you. When someone pulls away from you, the first instinct many people have is to reach out and ask for closure. They want to understand what went wrong, why the person changed, why the promises or the connection didn't turn into what it seemed like it could have been. On the surface, it feels like a reasonable request. After all, you invested time, emotion, maybe even a piece of your future into this person. Surely, the least they can do is give you an explanation, right? But here's the truth that no one likes to hear when you beg for closure. You're putting your sense of peace and self-worth into their hands. You're saying, I cannot move on until you give me the gift of an answer. And the problem with that is that it gives away all your power. Think about what happens when you go to someone who already has an avoidant nature and you ask them for closure. By definition, this is a person who struggles with emotional intimacy, who often feels suffocated or burdened by emotional demands. If you walk up to them needing closure, what do they see? They don't see your strength. They don't see your worth. They see someone who is dependent on them for clarity, someone who needs them to feel better. And that dynamic almost always pushes them further away. The irony is that the more you demand closure, the less likely you are to get it. On a deeper level, closure isn't really about them anyway. What most people are really asking for is relief from uncertainty. They're hoping the other person will give them the missing puzzle piece so they can tie up the story neatly and stop thinking about it. But here's the catch, even if that person gives you an answer, it rarely satisfies. If they say, it's not you, it's me, you replay it in your head and think, but why wasn't I enough for you? If they say, I just wasn't ready, you wonder, why weren't you ready with me? Whatever explanation they give only leads to more questions. That's why chasing closure becomes a never-ending loop. You don't end up with peace. You end up with obsession. What actually creates peace is refusing to hand over that responsibility. It's recognizing that closure isn't something you receive from another person. It's a decision you make when you stop begging for answers and instead decide to close the book yourself. You take back control. You no longer need them to tell you why they didn't show up for you. Their silence, their absence, their avoidance. That is the answer. The more you chase them for an explanation, the more you communicate that you don't trust yourself to decide when enough is enough. But when you step away without demanding anything, you show that you don't need them to validate your experience. That act alone is infinitely more powerful than any words they could give you. Closure is one of those words that sounds comforting, like it promises a clean ending, a tidy bow on something messy. But the truth is, the kind of closure people crave from another person almost never exists. Real closure doesn't come from someone else giving you the perfect explanation. It comes from you deciding to accept what happened and move forward. When you expect an avoidant partner to give you closure, you're setting yourself up for disappointment because the very thing you want, emotional openness and clarity, is usually what they struggle to provide. Waiting for them to suddenly become the person they weren't during the relationship is like waiting for a storm to turn into sunshine just because you ask nicely. It keeps you stuck, hoping for something they can't or won't give. The reason self-created closure is so important is because it shifts the focus back to where it belongs on your own power, your own healing, your own choices. If you rely on someone else to give you peace of mind, you'll always be at the mercy of their willingness to cooperate. Some people disappear without explanation, some give half-truths, and some say things that only leave you with more confusion. If your peace depends on their words, then your healing timeline is controlled by them. But when you decide that closure is an inside job, you no longer have to wait. You don't need their permission to heal. Creating closure for yourself means making sense of the story on your own terms. It means looking at what happened, not through the lens of why wasn't I good enough, but through the lens of what did this reveal about what I want and what I won't tolerate. It's about accepting that their actions were a reflection of them, not a verdict on your worth. When you realize that you stop chasing explanations that were never going to give you peace in the first place. One of the hardest truths to accept is that closure often comes in silence. Their withdrawal, their lack of communication, their inconsistency. That is the closure. It tells you everything you need to know about their capacity to show up. Instead of resisting that reality, the powerful move is to embrace it. To say, this is who they are right now, and I deserve more. That shift turns the story from one of rejection into one of clarity. Suddenly, closure is no longer a favor they owe you. It's a choice you've already made. And in that choice, you find a freedom that no explanation could ever provide. When someone pulls away, the most natural reaction is to lean in, to try harder, to prove your value by showing them what they're missing. It feels counterintuitive to step back when all you want is closeness. But the truth is, chasing someone who is withdrawing rarely brings them closer. It usually does the opposite. An avoidant person, in particular, tends to feel suffocated when pressure is applied. The more you pursue, the more they retreat, not because you're unworthy, but because their instinct is to protect themselves from emotional demands. That's why withdrawing your energy is so powerful. It flips the dynamic completely. When you stop pouring effort into someone who isn't meeting you halfway, you create space for reality to reveal itself. If the connection was genuine and they value you, your absence will be felt. If they don't step forward, when you step back, then you've saved yourself the pain of chasing someone who was never going to show up in the way you needed. Either way, you win. The key is that your energy is no longer wasted in pursuit, but preserved for yourself and for those who can actually reciprocate. Pulling back isn't about playing games or trying to manipulate them into missing you. It's about reclaiming your dignity and recognizing that your value isn't proven by how hard you try to convince someone to stay. There's a difference between expressing interest and abandoning your self-respect. When you continue to chase after someone who avoids intimacy, what you're really saying is, your comfort matters more than my worth. Withdrawing flips that message, my worth matters more than your avoidance. It also allows you to break free from the anxious cycle of seeking reassurance. When you're chasing, your emotions are tied to their every move. Did they text back? Did they cancel plans? Did they give you enough affection today? Your sense of stability becomes hooked on their actions, and that keeps you in a constant state of unease. By withdrawing your energy, you cut that cord. You no longer wait for crumbs of attention to feel whole. Instead, you show yourself that you're capable of standing on your own without their validation. Ironically, it's often this very act of detaching that makes avoidant individuals notice what they've lost. They don't feel regret when you cling tighter. They feel regret when your presence disappears, and they realize they no longer have the comfort of your pursuit. Your absence forces them to confront what it feels like to not have you around, and even if they don't return, you've already won because you've proven to yourself that your energy is too precious to be spent on someone who doesn't meet you with the same effort. There is nothing more powerful than showing through the way you live that your happiness was never dependent on one person choosing you. When you stop centering your life around the person who avoided commitment or pulled away and instead redirect the energy back into yourself, something shifts. You begin to show that your confidence, joy, and sense of worth are self-sustaining. Living confidently without them doesn't mean pretending you never cared or acting cold to prove a point. It means deciding that their absence will not define the quality of your life. It means making choices that reflect you know your value, regardless of who failed to recognize it. When you thrive without someone who pulled away, you communicate something they can't ignore. You were never waiting for them to validate you. That kind of energy is magnetic because it's rare. Most people chase, beg, or fold under the weight of rejection. Few people rise above it and create a life so fulfilling that it highlights the mistake of those who walked away. And here's the irony: when you no longer need their attention, that's often when they feel drawn back. They see the glow of someone who has moved on, someone who has taken control of their own story, and suddenly the power dynamic has shifted completely. Living confidently without them also gives you the greatest gift you could ask for: clarity about your own strength. You begin to realize that your self-worth isn't fragile. It doesn't shatter just because one person couldn't meet you where you deserve to be met. Confidence grows when you choose to keep investing in yourself, in your passions, your friendships, your health, your future. Instead of replaying their absence over and over, you fill your life with presence, your own. Another key part of this is authenticity. Confidence is not about faking happiness or trying to make them jealous. It's not about curating a life for show. True confidence is living in alignment with your values, doing what makes you feel alive, and surrounding yourself with people who see your worth clearly. That's what makes you unshakable. And it's what makes the person who avoided you feel the sting of regret. Not because you set out to punish them, but because thriving without them highlights the gap between the life they could have had with you and the one they settled for instead. The power lies in the fact that you're no longer reacting to their behavior. You're no longer waiting, questioning, or trying to fix what was never yours to fix. You've taken control of the only thing you ever truly had control over: yourself. That kind of confidence doesn't just make them notice, it makes you free. Regret is not created by tears, by pleading, or by asking someone to explain why they left. Regret is born when a person realizes they no longer have access to something valuable, something rare, something they once took for granted. When you played for answers, you keep yourself within their reach. You're still there, still available, still orbiting their world. But when you step away, when you begin to thrive and live fully without them, that's when the absence hits. That's when regret creeps in, because they can't ignore the undeniable fact that you are doing better without them than you ever did with them. Avoidant people don't usually regret losing someone in the moment. At first, they may even feel relieved when you stop demanding closeness or clarity. But time changes perspective. As they watch you flourish, they begin to see what they let go of. They notice your strength, your joy, and the way others are drawn to you. Regret grows not from your words, but from the silence of your absence and the success of your growth. They may not say it out loud, but it lingers in their mind. They realize that by avoiding intimacy, they lost someone who would have been extraordinary to build a life with. The most powerful thing you can do is refuse to shrink just because someone couldn't meet you where you deserved to be met. Thriving without them isn't about revenge, it's about refusing to let their choices limit your future. When you invest in your own life, your passions, your health, your friendships, your purpose, you create a reality that no longer revolves around them. That transformation is what they end up noticing. They don't regret when you fall apart and cling tighter. They regret when you no longer need them, and they see the gap between what they walked away from and what you've become. And here's the deeper truth: the real victory isn't in making them regret. The real victory is in the fact that their regret no longer matters to you. By thriving, you reclaim your power and stop measuring your worth through their eyes. Ironically, it's that exact independence that triggers regret in them. They finally see that you were never the problem, that their avoidance cost them someone irreplaceable. But by the time they recognize it, you're already living a life that proves you never needed their validation in the first place. That's what regret really looks like, when they realize they lost you at the exact moment you found yourself. So here's the truth: you don't need closure from someone who couldn't show up for you. You don't need to chase, beg, or prove your worth. Your closure comes the moment you decide that their absence is the answer. Your power shows when you withdraw your energy, when you choose to thrive, and when you live with a confidence that says, "I was always enough," whether you saw it or not. Remember this: avoidants don't regret losing someone who pleads for explanations. They regret losing the person who walks away with dignity and then builds a life that shines so brightly it can't be ignored. That person can be you. That person is you. The moment you stop waiting for them and start writing your own story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me your time and attention. And most of all, thank you for choosing yourself. I'll see you next time. Take care and never forget your worth.